this and not see your mother on the screen, or is she always your mother?
This stumped right at the beginning.
Well, it occurred to me as I was watching the film. I wonder what Michael is thinking right now. Does he see Mom?
Both.
Or
both. I think she has some wonderful moments in the picture. It's a very weird movie, with some sort of unintentional humor, I think, and then the great duo of Sidney Greenstreet and Peter Lorre. My mother is particularly fond of Peter Lorre. I don't think anyone who is a connoisseur of actors could not be impressed by what an extraordinary actor he was. He's the acting equivalent, I think, of a baseball pitcher who throws a knuckleball. You never quite know where it's going to end up, but it always ends up in a good place. When I watch it, yeah, you know, it was, oh God, now 60-odd years ago. My mother was 32. I remember thinking she was 32. I loved her very much, especially at that. I didn't see her very much because she was always at Warner Brothers. So it brought back memories. But then I also see the performance, and I also think some of those scenes, her villainy was very well delivered, and especially her anger, which fortunately I didn't come my way too often. I mean, if it had, God, it would be bad. But her, I thought she was very, very, very good in that. So, yes, my mother and also an actress.
When Alan was giving the introduction to the film, he mentioned that this was something of a follow-up to The Maltese Falcon. But to go even further than that, John Huston actually developed this screenplay before he did The Maltese Falcon, and it had sat around for a while. And your mother was originally who Huston wanted to be cast as Bridget O'Shaughnessy in The Maltese Falcon, and not Mary Astor. So in a way, that's who got the job. But I'm going to go way out on a limb here tonight. I am a Dashiell Hammett acolyte, and I am going to state that I really think that Geraldine Fitzgerald would have been the ultimate Bridget O'Shaughnessy. And I present Three Strangers as evidence of that she is so spectacular with those two other men in this movie. And just what you talked about, the villainy, and there's a little unhinged quality that comes through in that performance that would have been spectacular for Bridget.
Yeah, and listen, Geraldine Fitzgerald, Bridget O'Shaughnessy, I mean, that's made in heaven.
Exactly.
Actress in part. Yeah, there was a bunch of kind of renegades in Hollywood at that time. Humphrey Bogart, John Huston, Bette Davis, my mother. My mother's a great friend of Bette Davis. Who were all drinking, staying up late, and having affairs and all the things that people do. John Huston did want my mother. My mother was always fighting Warner Brothers, Jack Warner, who behaved meanly to his contract actors, and especially to the women. The studio didn't want her. Huston did want her, and then there came this weird little extra fillip that came in. John Huston had a romance with Olivia de Havilland, who was a great friend of my mother's. And my mother felt, when he talked about the part, that maybe she should turn him down because he hadn't treated her friend that well. Now, in Hollywood, people treating each other badly is not unknown. and people do have romances, and they don't end up the way you'd like them to. Look at the couple in the movie tonight, any of the couples, really. But I think she would have been wonderful, but then she said, I don't want to do the part, and then the studio didn't want her, and that's when Mary Astor came in, who I think had just, her very scandalous diaries had been published about Mary Astor's affair with George S. Kaufman, and that made her a very hot property, kind of like a sober version of Lindsay Lohan or something.
and no offense to Mary Astor, who's fantastic in the film, but your mom, wow, that would have been something else.
It would have been great. I agree with you.
Yes. Well, now you have broached the subject by mentioning affairs in Hollywood, and I'm not sure, because Alan didn't touch on this in the intro, and I don't know how many people who are in the audience tonight are aware of, you know, your lineage. and how there's murmurs and things. It's absolutely fascinating, and you know where I'm going with this.
I'm guessing.
At what point in your life did you begin to suspect that your father may be someone other than who you thought your father was? Let me phrase it that way.
Yeah, it's good, Eddie.
Thank you.
Well, it's all in the book, but I was 16 and I just started working as an actor, which is not a career that I prospered in. And I thought the name Michael Lindsay Hogg was not going to be of much use if I wanted to act, since people couldn't pronounce it and spell it. And I was working on some names on a little pad, thinking, well, maybe I'll change my name. The year before, I'd met Orson Welles when he was directing King Lear in New York and playing it, and my mother was in it as well. He was very nice to me, and we formed a kind of bond. I was only 15 at the time. So I had this idea, who would I call myself? Michael Sokolov, Michael Gulger, Michael Smith. And then I write Michael Wells, and I think that might sound good. So I go down to my mother and I say, I think I've got it. She says, what have you got? I said, my stage name. And she said, yeah, what is it? And I say, Michael Wells. And she said, well, I'm not sure that's such a good idea. And then I say, gee, what? And she said, well, it's just that when I came to America first, and I was acting in the Mercury Theater with Orson Welles, some people think that he and I had an affair and that he's your father. What? And that's where it began. I was 16, I wanted a career in the theater, and it was a rumor which was around a long time, and I wrote the book, and what might be interesting to various book readers is there's a bit about my mother, there's Hollywood, there's my mother's friendship with Bogart and Betty Davis. I did a lot of rock and roll work, which is interesting because I've got a good memory. And then in the end of the book, it's like a mystery story. And you don't realize, I mean, I was like the agency who was telling these stories because they all happen. And you don't really realize, as the book's going on, that it is turning into a mystery. And the mystery is, I suppose, this person, me, who tries to find out who his father really is. And then by the most extraordinary coincidence, I finished the book, and then this coincidence occurred, and then it seems that this coincidence verified that story.
I do want you to tell one story from the book, and I cannot recommend this book highly enough, because Michael has a great gift as a writer in memoir for writing his life story as though it's a movie. And it's beautiful. You get these wonderful little glimpses, and it's told in a fabulously non-linear way, where he finds very smart, emotional ways to connect these passages from different points in his life. So I've never told that to you before, and I really think it's a spectacular book. And I do want to mention this one very funny story about when you started acting, and you were actually in a production with Orson Welles of the Chimes at Midnight that you were doing, when you he upgraded you a little bit because you had your 2 lines.
Well, it was more than having my 2 lines. He thought I would try to kill him. We were rehearsing Chimes at Midnight, which is a rehash of certain Shakespeare plays cobbled together, in London. And Orson Welles was playing Falstaff, the great fat character. So we're rehearsing in London. He's rehearsed for 2 days, and then Orson goes to the director, friend of his, and says, I have a terrible toothache. And the director said, oh, my dear fellow, you should get it fixed. You should go to the dentist. And Orson said, yes, I could go to the dentist. And he did go to the dentist. The only problem was the dentist was in Rome. So we didn't see him for 2 or 3 weeks while we were rehearsing. I think he was trying to slot in another movie on the side or something. And so we eventually were rehearsing the play, and the only time we ever rehearsed the play in scene order was the night before we opened, which went on for 24 hours. At a certain point, I was playing a character who was meant to rush on from the wings with my sword out and seemed to kill Falstaff, who then pretends he's dead because he wants to not have to be actually killed, so pretend he's dead. Okay, so it's like 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning in the north of Ireland, on the stage of the Opera Theatre, and I'm standing in the wings waiting for my cue, and Orson is not really paying too much attention because he's trying to learn his lines from a copy of the play he's got in his hand. And so he, rather than really paying attention to what's going on, he's just wandering around the stage. And so then here's my cue, and I come rushing on with my sword out, and I've been told by the director to say, "Aye," meaning I'm a dangerous assailant and I'm trying to kill him, so I say, "Aye." And I miss him by not very much because he's turned and is turning up. So I actually miss him by like 6 inches with my steel sword. Then I run off into the wings and think, well, I've done my bit well, and I said, "Aye," and I'm obviously a very fearsome character. And then I hear this big bellow voice saying, "I don't care when it's 3 o'clock in the morning in Belfast in the north of Ireland. I don't care when the sound cues aren't working. I don't care about anything, but when Michael Lindsay Hogg tries to kill me, I quit." I think he was hungry. Because someone told me that a roast chicken had been delivered from the hotel a few moments before this encounter. And then at 4 o'clock in the morning he came back and he seemed to be very jolly. Maybe a glass of wine had been delivered with the chicken. And then we were friends again. But I didn't try to kill him. Why? He was great man.
You paint a fabulous portrait of him in your memoir, and I have to ask, because you're the only person in the world that I could ask this to, does it feel weird to grow up thinking that your father may be, and you can only really say this of Orson Welles, perhaps the most talented man of the 20th century? Any weird pressure or something there? I mean, how did this really affect you?
Well, because it was only a rumor, although, and the rumor came up and then subsided and came up and subsided through most of my adult life. And there were times, see, my mother always said it wasn't true. My mother, when I questioned her, would say, no, it wasn't true, we didn't have an affair, we didn't do anything, he wasn't your father, he just was a nice friend. That bit wasn't true, they did have an affair, because I know now for several reasons, whether I'm the result of that, it looks like. But they did have an affair. So my mother did not tell me the truth, but she didn't tell me the truth for her own reasons. It wasn't that she was like the character tonight in the movie. She wasn't evil, but sometimes you sort of make deals with yourself and you think, in order for my life to go on the way I need it to go on, some things have to be buried or altered or looked at in a different way. So I think that's why she did it. So when it came out that it looks like Orson is my father, they were all dead. Orson was dead, Edward Lindsay Hogg was dead, my mother was dead. And so the place that they'd always been in my life, that's where they remain. Orson had been a consistently inconsistent person in my life, to a degree that when we finished the play in Dublin, he was going to direct Rhinoceros by Ionesco with Laurence Olivier in London. He says, I'd like you to work with me as my assistant. I said, gee, that'd be great. So he said, I'm going to London tomorrow, you're in Ireland, I'll call you in a few days to tell you when to come over. Eager. I didn't hear from him for another 4 years. And 4 years later, I'm going to direct Ready, Steady, Go, my rock and roll television show, and I get an announcement over the speaker, a telephone call from Michael Lindsay Hogg, telephone call. So I go pick it up, and it's Mrs. Rogers, who's Orson's secretary, and she said, oh, Michael, I haven't spoken to you for a while. And I said, no. She said, Mr. Welles would like you to have dinner with him tonight with Marlene Dietrich. Are you free? I said, no, I'm doing the television show. I can't make it till 11. Is that okay? No, it's too late. She's got a flight to Paris in the morning. I know Mr. Welles will be disappointed, she said. I didn't hear from him for another 4 years. So when I say he was consistently inconsistent, that's what it was like. So he was not a person who, with all his great talent and his wit and his jokes and so that, who particularly liked any form of family bond. He had his affections for people, and often he behaved in a very affectionate way to me. But it wasn't really what he was interested in. He was interested in his work. And I think family was an intrusion, in a way. So when it all sort of came out, resolution, as I say, they'd taken their, you know, like in your life you have your parents and people you care about, people you don't care about, and after a while they're sort of set. They're like actors in a part, and those are the parts they're playing. And so by the time it all shook out, those are the parts they all were playing. And so I'm me. I mean, that's good and that's bad too. But also, you know, I was lucky when you said one of the greatest men, because when I did rock and roll, I worked with John Lennon. And so I'm very lucky. I sit here in Palm Springs at the Noir Festival, but I was lucky that I have come in contact with people of exceptional ability.
Well, there's a nice transition. Alan did tease that you were one of the first people to really work in translating rock and roll into the media age on television and then in films. Just tell us a little bit about that, what must have been an incredibly heady time, and how you got into that. And Michael worked with the Rolling Stones and the Beatles in England, and you had a phenomenal line in your book where you just said, in working with the Beatles, you said, I was going to work for the 4 most famous people in the history of the world, which is true. They absolutely were. And
yeah, I'm glad you quoted that, because at the time, it's hard now, you know, that we now are in the 21st century, we're talking about just after the middle of the 20th century, is they were the 4 most famous people in the world. Their faces were on every magazine cover, and every album cover, and every newspaper, on television, Ed Sullivan. And because they were so good, as well as being so famous and so talented, you couldn't get them out of your mind or your mind's eye. And so when I met them for the first time, I was waiting in a room for them, and when they came in, it wasn't like people coming in anymore. It was like characters from the cartoons. It was like Mickey and Donald, and Archie and Jughead, that their faces had become so famous, they'd taken on like a different dimension. Rock and roll videos, in the early days, bands, first of all, everyone thought rock and roll was going to be a fad, like the hula hoop, and it was going to have a kind of clock on it, whether it's 10 years or 12 years, and no one could have imagined it's gone on like it has. The bands, normally, English bands performed in English television shows, pop shows, and I directed one of them, a good one called Ready, Steady, Go, and American bands were on Hullabaloo and Shindig and things like that. But in England, particularly, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones were so successful that they were able to say to the television stations, we're going to produce a video, we're going to give you something to play, and if you don't want to play it, you won't have us. Which also allowed them to be playing in Germany when they were in England, so it's like that. I mean, it's what happens now, but it hadn't happened then. Because of this rock and roll show, I was directing Ready, Steady, Go, with the Rolling Stones were on once every 6 weeks, The Who, we discovered The Who. The Beatles asked to do a video with me, which was Paperback Writer in Rain. Mm-hmm. And then, because I got friendly, particularly with Mick Jagger, I did theirs, Jumping Jack Flash, and then the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus, and then the Beatles movie Let It Be. But the videos really were because the Stones and the Beatles, A, were powerful enough, and B, there were real security issues at the time. I mean, like people throwing themselves off the roof at them and things like that. And so that's where videos came from, and there was, geez, you know, I was at the right place at the right time. And of course, it was rather like throwing a rock in a pool. The ripples went out and out, and you had MTV. But early on, it was really like a cottage industry. I mean, there were very few of us doing videos, and very few of us doing it, you know, with the Beatles and the Stones. Mainly me.
But it was interesting also because it seemed like you really wanted to do music videos, but the idea was we just really want to see them perform, right? Because your original concept for Paperback Writer was truly a music video.
Yeah, I wanted to do a sort of story form video, which was the Beatles working in a newspaper office, and one of them wants to be paperback writer, and it would have scenes and it would all add up and it'd be good. But it would take them out of standing on the stage playing their guitars. But Brian Epstein didn't want that. This is the year before he died. He wanted it just to be, as he called it, a video of the boys performing. So that's what we did. We shot it fairly simply, fairly straight, over 2 days. The next time I did a video with the Beatles, it was Hey Jude and Revolution, and Brian had died. And I talked to McCartney about it, and we realized that the money was, this is going to sound a pretty clear remark, the money was the Beatles. So if you have those 4 faces and a great song, you didn't particularly want to mess it up with having them be in monkey suits and doing something else. You just wanted to see them perform. But then we realized we did the Hey Jude video, and if you've seen it, a lot of people come on at the end and sing along with them. It had a growing sense to the video. It turned out not to be just them, but it turned out to be the world, a kind of microcosm of the world. And then when I worked with the Stones, I've also done story videos with them, but more often it's just them performing, because if you have Mick Jagger at his prime and Keith Richards, if you like that kind of music, you don't want to look at anything. You want to see what they do.